The river at night was a living thing. Its surface looked black, like polished obsidian stretching from one bank to the other, reflecting only a broken copy of the stars. The jungle leaned in close, as if trying to hear its own heartbeat in the water. Somewhere, a howler monkey roared, its voice echoing across the dark canopy like distant thunder. Insects stitched a constant high electric hum over everything. A small wooden boat slid through it all, lantern light trembling on the surface, cutting a fragile circle of gold out of the vast, patient dark. "Myth of the day," I said softly into the microphone clipped to my shirt, trying to keep my voice steady as the boat rocked. Out here that phrase feels a little too small. These aren't just stories people tell before bed. Tonight, we are on the Rio Negro, one of the great blackwater rivers of the Amazon, and we are moving straight into the territory of a myth that locals say is very much alive. I paused, letting the river speak in the background, the quiet slap of waves against the hull, the creak of old wood, the whine of mosquitoes near my ear. "The Boiúna," I continued, "the Great Black Serpent, mother of whirlpools, eater of canoes, keeper of secrets in the deep." Across from me, sitting at the bow with one hand resting lightly on the side of the boat, Paulo smiled in the lantern glow. His skin was the warm brown of river people, his hair tied back, his eyes reflecting light like an animal's. "You're nervous," he said in Portuguese, voice low so it wouldn't carry. "I can hear it in the way you breathe." "I'm respectful," I answered, switching to his language. "That's a better word." He chuckled. "Respect is just fear with better manners." Behind us, the boat's small motor coughed and hummed. Ahead, the river narrowed slightly, channeled between dark walls of trees whose roots dug deep into invisible banks. We were an hour upstream from the last village, deeper into the labyrinth of creeks and channels that stitched the Amazon together. Back in the city, this series, Myth of the Day, would appear as a neat 40-minute video with crisp edits and atmospheric music. But out here, under the indifferent eyes of the stars, it was just two people in a fragile hull, pushing slowly into a story that had been growing for centuries. "Say it again," I told Paulo, "the way your grandfather told you. Start from the beginning." He nodded, gaze still on the water. "My grandfather said the river is like a sleeping anaconda," Paulo began. "Long, powerful, and mostly calm. But inside it, under the skin of water, there's another serpent, much older, darker. We call her Boyuna, the Great Black One. Some people say she's only a snake, others say she can be many things, boat, woman, island, but everyone agrees on one thing. When she turns in her sleep, men drown." He dipped his fingers into the water, letting the current slip between them. "Do you believe in her?" I asked. He shrugged in a way that suggested the question wasn't quite the right shape. "I believe in the river," he said. "That is enough." The lantern flickered as a breeze passed. The shadows along the bank shifted like a line of waiting figures. I didn't grow up with Boyuna. I grew up with city myths, monsters in abandoned buildings, ghosts on highways. The Amazon was something I saw in documentaries and drone shots, an aerial ocean of green with a ribbon of silver or black cutting through it. When I first heard her name, Boiúna, Cobra Grande, the Great Serpent, it was in a cafe in Manaus, through the mouth of a young biologist who swore he'd seen something in the water that science couldn't explain. "It was like a moving shadow under the boat," he said, eyes wide over his cup of coffee. "Too big to be a fish, too slow to be a dolphin. We were anchored, no current, no wind, and suddenly the river just bulged. My uncle crossed himself and told us not to talk about it." "Did you measure it?" I had asked, thinking like a documentarian already, imagining scale, reference points, overlays. He'd laughed a little harshly. "How do you measure something the river doesn't want you to see?" The name lodged in my mind like a hook. Months later, when the channel asked me to develop a series where each episode explored one myth in depth, its origins, its psychology, its lingering power, Boyuna rose from the depths of my memory like something answering a call. Now, with the city far behind me and the river pressing close, the myth felt a lot less like something to frame neatly and a lot more like something that could swallow us whole if we weren't careful. Paulo's voice pulled me back. "You know what she does first?" he asked.
What?
"She drinks the light," he said. A cloud slid over the moon at that exact moment, dimming the world. Our lantern seemed suddenly fragile, a single candle in a cathedral of dark. "Funny," I said, forcing a smile. "I thought that was just the weather." He shook his head. "Weather has reasons. The Boyuna has moods." We fell silent. Somewhere ahead, a bird gave a sharp, panicked cry and then went quiet. The motor's sound seemed too loud, too crude for this place. I signaled to Paulo. "Let's cut it." He twisted back and shut off the engine. It coughed, sputtered, and then died. The sudden absence of its droning filled my ears with an almost painful quiet. In that space, other sounds rushed in, the whisper of wind through high branches, the drip of water from leaves, the tiny splash of fish near the surface. The boat drifted, carried slowly by the current. "This is how my grandfather told it," Paulo said finally. "Listen well, city man. If we tell her story right, maybe she will be pleased. Long before engines," he began, "long before the big boats came up the river with their bright lights and their noise, there were only canoes and oars and paddles. The nights were darker then, because oil lamps are not the same as these." He nodded toward our LED lantern, "and because the stars were not yet shy." He shifted, settling into the rhythm of a born storyteller. "In those days, the Boyuna was already old. Some say she was born when the first big tree fell into the first deep water and darkness covered the roots. Others say she came from the sky, a piece of night that fell and never climbed back. However she began, she grew. Every time someone spoke her name in fear, she grew. Every time someone vanished in a whirlpool, she grew. By the time my grandfather was young, she was as long as the river between two villages and as thick as a ceiba tree. I imagined a shape under us, immense, coiled through the bends of the river. The thought made my skin tighten. People knew the rules then," Paulo continued. "They knew where the river was safe and where it was not. There are stretches, even today, where the water looks the same, but the elders will not cross at certain hours, not at dusk, not before dawn. They say the Boiuna prefers to hunt when day and night are making the trade." "What does she hunt?" I asked. He looked at me as if the answer should have been obvious. "Us," he said, "but not only with teeth." He went on before I could ask. "There was a man," Paulo said. "Let us call him Bento. He lived in a small house by the river with his wife and little girl. He was a strong paddler, a good fisherman, and a stubborn fool, like many men who think the river is theirs. His wife would warn him, 'Do not go out on nights when the frogs fall silent. Do not stay on the water when fog rises without wind.' These are her signs." He would laugh and say, "I have strong arms and a sharp blade. The only serpents I fear are the small ones that hide in the grass." One year, the fish were scarce. The flood came late. People muttered that the river was angry. Bento said the river was just water and the fish were just fish. That year, he started taking risks, fishing longer, going further, staying out at night to cast nets in places his father had avoided. One night, a fog came down on the river like white smoke. It swallowed trees, banks, even the moon. The frogs stopped. The night birds went quiet. Bento's wife begged him not to go out. "Tomorrow," she said, "when the sun is strong, when the river remembers we are small." But Bento had heard that the big fish were back upstream, near a deep bend that people called the Boyuna's throat. And so, of course, that is where he went. Our boat drifted past a bend that could have been the one in the story, a slow, dark curve where the river seemed to hesitate before moving on. The fog was so thick, Paulo said, that Bento could barely see the end of his canoe. The world became only the sound of his paddle, the wet wood under his knees, the thin circle of light from his torch. He told himself the quiet was nothing, that the frogs were sleeping, that the birds were tired, that his heart was beating fast because he had drunk too much coffee. He reached the deep bend without seeing another soul. The water there was like obsidian, no stars, no reflections, just black. He cast his net 3 times, and 3 times brought up nothing but wet rope. That was when he heard it, a sound like someone exhaling deep below the water. He froze. Again, the long, slow sigh of something huge rising. Bento told himself it was just bubbles from plants, gas escaping the mud, the river talking in its sleep. He was almost ready to leave when he saw a light ahead. It was small and warm, like the flame of another fisherman's torch, bobbing gently in the fog. Relieved, he paddled toward it. "Friend," he called, "the fish are hiding from me tonight. Have you had better luck?" The light did not answer. It hung there, a soft golden ember in the mist. As he drew closer, he could make out the shape of another canoe just beyond the glow. A figure sat in it, very still. "My friend," Bento called again, "are you deaf or just rude?" The figure did not move. When he was finally close enough, Bento reached out with his paddle to tap the other boat. His paddle met nothing. The light drifted back just out of reach. Annoyed now and a little unnerved, Bento pushed harder. The river seemed suddenly thicker, as if he were paddling through oil. The fog swallowed his own torchlight. The world became that single golden glow ahead, pulsing gently, calling to him. He forgot that the river had banks. He forgot that there was a house somewhere with a wife who worried and a child who would wake in a few hours and call his name. There was only the glow and the promise that he would not be alone in this strange, swallowed world. He reached out one more time. His fingers touched water that was not water. Paulo fell silent. Our boat rocked slightly as a wave, small but oddly heavy, passed under us. "What was it?" I asked, though I knew. "The eye," Paulo said softly. "One of them. Big as a plate, blacker than this river, with a ring of gold around it like stolen sunlight." The Boyuna had been swimming just below the surface, her skin so dark, so cold, that his eyes had slid right over her. She had lured him with her light, like the lanternfish of the deep sea, except her lantern was memory. The memory of not being alone, the memory of other boats, other men she had consumed. When he touched that light, he saw everything she had seen. For a moment he was in a tunnel of scales, spinning round and round. He saw canoes turning over and over as men shouted and disappeared. He saw houses on stilts flooded in sudden storms that came from clear skies. He saw entire stretches of forest drown when the river rose higher than it ever had before, with no warning. He saw, most of all, how small he was. He tried to pull his hand back, but the water had him, not just his flesh, his thoughts, his arrogance, his stubborn belief that he was the one who decided when to come and go. The boiuna wrapped around his canoe, though he barely saw more than a moving shadow. She squeezed just enough to crack the wood. Water rushed in. Bento finally screamed. The next morning, villagers found pieces of his canoe washed ashore miles downstream. No body, no paddle, just wood marked with a pattern that looked like giant scales. "Since then," Paulo concluded, "people around here know what it means when light appears in the fog. It is not a friend, it is hunger." We drifted in silence long enough for the story to settle into the air like mist. "That's one story," Paulo said eventually. "There are others where she's not only cruel, some say she can be kind, that she warns people of floods by thrashing in the water days before, that she protects certain villages because someone there once did her a great favor. My grandmother believed that every big serpent in the river was a piece of her, like fingers from a hand we never see." "And you?" I asked again. "What do you believe now after all these years, after motors and batteries and GPS?" He looked down at the water. "I believe in respect," he said. "The river decides who returns." Hours slipped by. We recorded more. Snippets of Paulo's childhood, glimpses of the stars breaking through the clouds, reflections of the lantern in the curves of small waves. At times, I spoke directly to the microphone, narrating context, how colonial writers had recorded the Boyuna under different names, how riverine cultures had blended Catholic saints with serpent myths, how modern pilots still reported strange patches of electronic interference over certain stretches of water. But in between my practiced lines, the night pressed close and personal. Once we passed a floating tree trunk that my city-trained brain immediately labeled as just that, debris carried from upstream. Paulo steered us wide, his shoulders tight. "Why so cautious?" I asked lightly. "Afraid it's her?" "If it were her, you wouldn't see this much," he said quietly. "But some of her children like to rest at the surface. We give them space." The tree, if it was a tree, slid past, barnacles clinging to its side like pale teeth. Another time, we heard a splash so loud and sudden that I flinched, half expecting the boat to tip. The water settled again with suspicious speed. "Dolphin," I ventured. "Maybe," Paulo said. "Maybe." He didn't answer. Somewhere deep inside me, a city-grown skepticism muttered that this was all psychology. Stories layered over natural dangers to give them shape and meaning. The Amazon is full of real, measurable threats, currents that carve new channels overnight, floating logs that can punch holes through hulls, creatures with jaws strong enough to crush bone. My rational mind said that the Boyuna was just a personification of all that fear, a serpent made of everything we don't control. But another part of me, a quieter, older part, watched the way Paulo listened to the water and wondered if the line between myth and reality here wasn't as neat as I wanted it to be. "Tell me about the island," I said, remembering another rumor I'd heard. He smiled without joy. "Ah, that one, the island that moves." "Is it part of her too?" "Some say it is her back," he said. "Others say it is a place she carries for those she likes." "Like a sanctuary?" I asked. "Or a trap," he said. He told me how fishermen spoke of a small, inviting island that appeared some seasons in the middle of the river, covered in fruit trees and soft grass. From the water, it looked solid, but when some tried to camp there, they woke at night feeling the ground sway, as if breathing. Those who stayed too long found their tents flooded at high tide, not from waves, but from water seeping up between roots that were not roots at all. "One man," Paulo said, "swears that as he paddled away exhausted and half-mad, he saw the island slide under, and for a moment he saw eyes opening in what he thought were rocks. Big, black, with rings of gold, the same eyes as in Bento's story. He doesn't drink anymore." The night deepened. Clouds moved like slow ships across the sky, sometimes covering the moon completely, sometimes letting it spill silver over the water. Our lantern's battery wore down by degrees, its circle of light shrinking. "Want to head back?" Paulo asked at one point. "Not yet," I said, though my legs were stiff and my eyes burned. "The series is called Myth of the Day, but this one feels like it belongs to the night. I want people to hear the river like this, to feel how big it is when you're not watching it on a screen." "As you wish," he said, "but remember the Boyuna loves people who stay longer than they should." He was joking, more or less. Sometime near what must have been 2 in the morning, the air changed. Up until then, there had been a steady breeze, enough to keep the worst of the heat and insects at bay. Now the wind dropped, as if someone had closed a door. The humidity climbed. My shirt clung to my back. The jungle sounds shifted too. The insect's high chorus wobbled, then steadied in a new, slightly lower pitch. The frogs that had been calling back and forth fell silent. Even the distant rustle of monkeys in the canopy faded, leaving a thin, stretched quiet over the water. "Do you feel that?" I asked, whispering without meaning to. "Yes," Paulo said. "What is it?" "That's the river holding its breath," he answered. A thin mist coiled over the surface of the water, swirling in slow patterns that didn't match any breeze. The lantern began to flicker, not dimming exactly, but stretching its light in odd ways. Shadows bent at strange angles. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. "It's just a fog," I told myself. "Temperature change, moisture." The mist thickened around the boat, softening the edges of everything. Trees became vague smudges. The sky turned from black to a dull, luminous grey. Our own canoe seemed to float in a space without horizon. "Check the motor," I thought. "Turn it back on, just in case." Before I could reach back, Paulo's hand shot out and closed around my wrist. "Don't," he said. His voice was flat but firm. "Why not?" "Because you don't roar in a church," he said, "and you don't wake what you don't understand." I let my hand fall back into my lap. We drifted. The sound of water against wood grew louder, amplified by the fog. Each small wave sounded like a sigh. My heart, traitorous and obvious, thumped loud enough that I was sure Paulo could hear it. Then through the gauze of mist I saw a glow. It was faint, a soft, warm light about 30 meters ahead, hovering just above the water, small, human-sized, like a lantern held low in a boat. "No way," I whispered. Paulo exhaled slowly. "Don't look at it too long," he said. My rational brain kicked in like a defensive comedian. "It's another boat," I said. "Has to be. Maybe a fisherman or one of those night transport guys. Or—" "Out here," Paulo said, "at this hour, in this place." He was right. We were well beyond normal routes, in a stretch of river that even locals called tricky. We had passed no lights for hours. The glow wavered gently, as if whichever hand held it were rising and falling with the swell of the river. It seemed to pulse in time with my heart, inviting, coaxing. "Hello," I called before Paulo could stop me. "Oi, quem? The light remained silent. Something inside me, some documentary maker impulse, wanted to lift the camera, to zoom, to capture, but my hands stayed heavy in my lap. The light drifted closer. "Back paddle," Paulo murmured, and slowly. We dipped our paddles into the water as quietly as we could, trying to nudge the boat away without making sudden movements. The light matched us, angle for angle, distance for distance, as if fixed in place ahead. "It's on the current," I said, trying to rationalize. "We're both moving with the same flow." "There is almost no current here," Paulo replied. "It's a deep bend. The river swirls. Nothing should move that smooth." The mist thickened around the light, but the glow never dimmed. If anything, it brightened as it neared. I realized with a small shock that I couldn't see what was making it. No outline of a boat, no human silhouette. Just light, hovering a hand's breadth above the surface. "Maybe it's gas," I said desperately. "Bioluminescence, some kind of natural phenomenon, methane igniting." "Then why does it come when the frogs go silent?" Paulo asked quietly. "Why does it appear only where the river is deep enough to hide something bigger than our house?" His grip on the paddle tightened. "Eyes forward," he said. "Do not reach for it, do not call to it, and whatever you do, don't lean over the side." The light was close enough now that I could see the water below it shiver, small ripples radiating outward in perfect circles. The surface there seemed darker than the surrounding river, if that was even possible. The hum I'd felt earlier returned, stronger. It wasn't a sound, exactly. More like the sense of a huge engine far underground, or a heartbeat 10 times bigger than mine, thudding slowly through water. In the center of that glowing circle, something moved. At first, it was just a shifting shadow. Then, as the light pulsed, I saw the curve of something vast and dark just below the surface, passing gently from left to right. My breath caught. It could have been a log, a sandbar, a trick of imagination. Or it could have been the Boyuna turning in her sleep. The light drifted a little closer. I could have reached out and touched it if I'd lain on my stomach and stretched. For a moment, just one, an insane urge gripped me to do exactly that, to lean over, to extend my hand, to see if this myth was solid, if it had skin, if it would answer my touch with anything but death. The compulsion was so sudden, so strong, that I actually shifted forward an inch before Paulo's hand slammed onto my shoulder, fingers digging in. "No!" he hissed. The spell broke. I shuddered and leaned back, heart pounding. The light bobbed as if disappointed. From somewhere in my chest, a little voice of reason shouted, "Film it. You're here to film it." Somehow, through the haze of fear and awe, my hand found the camera. I raised it slowly, trying not to make sudden motions, and hit record. The screen showed what my eyes saw: mist, darkness, the faint line of our boat's bow, and that inexplicable, solitary glow ahead. The autofocus hunted, confused by the fog, but it caught enough. "Can you see it?" I whispered into the mic. Paulo didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the water. The glow hung there for a few more breathless minutes, neither approaching nor retreating. Then, as gently as a candle being cupped by an unseen hand, it dimmed. The mist around it swallowed the fading light. The ripple on the surface smoothed. Within seconds, there was nothing there but ordinary dark water. The hum receded. I realized I'd been holding my breath. "Satisfied?" Paulo asked quietly. "I don't know," I said, still staring at the empty spot. Did we just see it? Her, or was that just... "Does it matter?" he asked. I thought of the camera, the footage, the audiences far away who would sit in bright rooms and argue in comment sections about whether this was real or fake. "Maybe not," I said. He started the motor again, and its crude human noise shattered the leftover silence. We turned the boat, heading slowly back downstream toward the world of electric light and reliable roads, leaving behind the bend where the river held its breath. Later, back at the research station that served as our temporary base, we watched the footage on a small laptop, mosquito netting billowing slightly in the breeze from a creaking fan. The glow was there, recorded in pixels. It wasn't as dramatic as it had felt in person. The camera flattened the world, made the mist look less deep, the dark less absolute. But the light was real, a soft, hovering ember in the middle of an otherwise featureless black. People will say it's edited, I thought, or a reflection, or a trick. Maybe they'd be right. "What will you tell them?" Paulo asked, leaning in the doorway with his arms crossed. "The truth," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "Which truth?" "That we went out on the river at night," I said slowly. "That the air changed, that the forest fell quiet, that we saw a light where no boat should be, that something moved under it, that I wanted very much to touch it, and I don't know why, that you stopped me, that the river felt different afterward, like someone had just gone back to sleep." He considered that. "Not bad," he said, "very honest for a storyteller." "And then," I added, "I'll tell them what you told me, your grandfather's story and the island, and the idea that the Boyuna isn't just one monster, but a way of thinking about the river itself." He nodded once. "Better," he said. I turned back to the screen. For the episode, I knew how I would frame it. We'd begin with the science, with tectonic plates and river dynamics, with maps and satellite images showing the Amazon's braided channels. We'd talk about how often canoes overturn in the dark, how easily disorientation can drown even strong swimmers, how real whirlpools form where currents meet. Then we'd move into the myth, into Bento's story, into the moving island and the eyes in the water. Then finally we'd show this footage, not as proof, not as a smoking gun, but as a question. Because the myth of the Boiuna isn't about whether a single giant serpent exists like a monster in a catalogue. It's about how humans try to carry respect into places that could kill them without effort. It's about fear shaped into a face and a name so that it can be remembered, taught, and passed on. I thought of something Paulo had said earlier. "You're nervous," he told me. "I can hear it in the way you breathe." He'd been right. Sitting there with the sound of the night seeping through the mosquito net and the image of that glow paused on the screen, I felt that same nervous respect. In the heart of the Amazon, a serpent of myth guards its watery realm with supernatural grace and power. Maybe she is only darkness and current and animal shapes glimpsed in the corner of the eye. Maybe she is a composite of centuries of loss, of boats that never came back and storms that rose too quickly. Or maybe, somewhere in the deep black slow-turning belly of the river, something vast and old occasionally opens one golden eye, looks up at the little wooden things scratching its surface, and decides, for one more night, to let them pass. As I reached to close the laptop, the fan stuttered. The light bulb above us flickered once, twice, then steadied. In the distance, from the direction of the river, came a low, drawn-out sound. Not quite thunder, not quite an animal, more like a long, slow sigh. Paulo and I looked at each other. "Tomorrow," I said quietly into my recorder, "we continue our journey through the myths of the Amazon. But tonight, somewhere out there, the Boyuna is turning in her sleep. And whether she is made of muscle and scale, or story and fear, or all of them together, one thing is certain. The river remembers that she is there even when we pretend she isn't." I switched the recorder off. Outside, the darkness pressed close, full of secrets older than cameras, older than words, older even than the first human who ever looked into a blackwater river and felt, deep in their bones, that something was looking back.